It's my pleasure to introduce our next panelist. And this is Jaime Rall, who is a student in the Sacred Arts program at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. Currently in the Sacred Arts concentration. Jaime is studying the theology and lived experience of sacred art and architecture in early and middle Byzantium. And she will be presenting today, continuing our theme on St. Nicholas, which is our destination later this afternoon and evening. The title of her presentation is Materiality, or Dematerialization, the Gleaming Marble of St. Nicholas Shrine and Lights of Byzantine Tradition.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's my privilege to be here. Today I'll be exploring an aspect of the recently built and consecrated St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church National Shrine at the World Trade Center. It's a remarkable sacred space in the Orthodox Christian tradition that's of course being honored by this symposium. And if you haven't been at tonight's special event, you're really in for a treat. It's a thought-provoking, beautiful, and moving experience. And it's such a well-chosen example for this event. St. Nicholas was designed and decorated with a deliberate blend of traditional and modern elements. So it offers an excellent case study for considering historical exemplars, symbolism, and theological concepts in relation to contemporary Orthodox church design. First, the architecture. Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava, well known for sinuous, white-ribbed, minimalist monuments filled with light, brought that same design aesthetic to the St. Nicholas project, but reinterpreted it in a structure that is unmistakably an Orthodox church, referencing paradigms from that tradition. One of Calatrava's key references for St. Nicholas was Hagia Sophia, the great church of Constantinople, as rebuilt under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. Churches that claim Hagia Sophia as inspiration often only mimic its shallow, broad dome, ignoring what Byzantinist Anthony Cutler called its billowing envelope of voids. But Calatrava, who himself approaches buildings as a succession of voids, was able to subtly take out that often neglected part of the tradition and carry it forward. In his design for St. Nicholas, as you see in the comparison here, hymns of Hagia Sophia's grandeur are produced through interior half-domes and niches, cascading down from a precisely pitched dome, intimating curves within curves. Yet this is achieved within an otherwise solidly Middle Byzantine framework, compact and intimate under a central dome. This building type, with many variations, has been the standard for churches in the Orthodox East for over a millennium. In its iconography, St. Nicholas follows a hierarchical scheme typical of the smaller Middle Byzantine churches it most closely resembles. This kind of program begins with an image of Christ in the dome, representing heaven, and descending through various zones. Closest to Christ, we see images of his acolytes, in this case the prophets. Then next zone down, scenes of the incarnation, the union of God and man, and finally in the lowest zone, nearest the living worshippers in the earthly realm of the nous, portraits of earthly saints. Yet within this traditional arrangement, the icons in St. Nicholas also feature symbols and stories of our own time and place. These modern elements convey that our very city, with its sorrows and hopes, is under the protective mantle of the Virgin, she who is called wider than the heavens, and under the gaze of her Son, the ruler of all, who reveals himself as the light of the world, who grants us his peace. We'll be hearing more about the icons from His Grace Bishop Joachim on this panel, who put together the iconographic program from the depths of the Orthodox tradition, while also keeping it deeply connected to the events of 9/11 and the mission of the shrine in the context of the rebuilt World Trade Center. My point here is simply that the form and iconographic program of St. Nicholas exhibit clear continuities with Byzantine models and theological understandings, intentionally interpreting that legacy in a contemporary context. Can the same be said of all the aspects of the church building? Today, my talk will explore how another element of this church relates to historical paradigms of church buildings and related theological interpretations in the Christian East. My focus is not on architectural forms or figural iconography, but an aspect of church buildings that is often overlooked as a source of theological meaning: their materials. And if I could leave you with one thought from this presentation, it is this: materials also matter. The materials used in church buildings, both inside and out, carry their own symbolic weight. Thus, they can either support or challenge the meanings that would otherwise emerge from other aspects of the design. As such, materials deserve their own analysis and to be situated in the broad scope of the tradition. For St. Nicholas Church, one of its most distinctive features, which we just heard a little bit about, is the striking use of white Pentelic marble, a gift from the government of Greece from the same vein used for the Parthenon. Pentelic marble is used as the dominant decorative element both in the church's interior and on its gleaming and glowing exterior. The rest of my presentation today will analyze this extensive utilization of white marble at St. Nicholas, its significance, and how it fits into traditional Byzantine paradigms of ecclesiastical architecture and decoration. In Byzantium, marble was a precious and prized decorative material that was highly appreciated for its aesthetic qualities. Numerous Byzantine ekphrases, or vivid rhetorical descriptions, bear witness to the use of marble in and on various church buildings. These uses of marble made a deep impression on their beholders and generated a variety of interpretive readings. Let's start with the marble on the interior of the church put into its historical context. Many church interiors in Byzantium had walls decorated with marble revetments. And while viewers today might see the patterns in marble as abstract or aniconic, Byzantine observers saw in them clear imagery and symbolism. In the 6th century, for example, Procopius and Paul the Salentiary marveled at the book-matched marble revetments at Hagia Sophia, likening their abstract patterns to landscapes of thick forests and meadows in full bloom, as in the quote we see here. This interpretation of marbles as an image of nature, of the beauties of the earthly creation, endured as a common convention or topos for centuries. In a 9th century description of another Constantinopolitan church, Emperor Leo VI went so far as to suggest that gullible bees might hasten to make honey from the flowers of its marble pavement. As has been convincingly argued by art historian Henry Maguire and others, this is more than rhetorical verbiage. This is really how these marbles were interpreted and experienced by Byzantine artists and spectators. However, these precedents do not quite map on to what we see at St. Nicholas. Crucially, the ekphrastic literature emphasizes that the marbles in Byzantine interiors were of many colors and heavily veined, and that it was these qualities, polychromatic, variegated, dynamic, that yielded their resemblance to the terrestrial world. I think this picture speaks a great deal. The kind of marbles that resemble the terrestrial world were not, and certainly not solely, the subtler, pale, monochromatic Pentelic type marble with its white ground and gentle gray streaks that adorns the interior of the new St. Nicholas Church. So let's look elsewhere. Is there evidence of specifically white marble in Byzantine church interiors? Yes, at times, but not exactly in the way it's seen at St. Nicholas. In Byzantium, white marble was sometimes used for paving church floors, where it was interpreted as an image of the sea. Ancient geological theories held marble to actually be a kind of petrified water, a suspension of earth particles in a solidified liquid. Thus, certain kinds of marble were used in building interiors to represent or symbolize water. By the 6th century, shimmering white Proconnesian marble, with its rippling gray veins, had surpassed all others for evoking this association. The most salient paradigm for this application of marble is again Hagia Sophia. The great church has a floor of white Proconnesian marble, interpreted by observers for over 1,000 years as a frozen sea. This is crossed by 4 darker green Thessalian marble bands that were seen as the rivers of paradise. A number of other Byzantine churches also had Proconnesian marble floors that were interpreted similarly. At St. Nicholas, there's also a gray striated white floor with darker contrasting bands, possibly, I'm not sure, in imitation of Hagia Sophia, although here the veining is paler and less suggestive than the Proconesian examples. But there's a bigger discontinuity at St. Nicholas. Consistent with Calatrava's modern aesthetic, but not with the Byzantine examples, white marble is used nearly exclusively throughout the church's interior. It extends up from the floor to frame the icons on the walls and in the dome. It's used for doors, niches, even for the icon screen and liturgical furniture. I've found no material or textual example of a purpose-built Byzantine church interior in which white marble was used so extensively. The overall sense of bright, cool whiteness inside St. Nicholas from the Pentelic marble, then, marks a departure from the paradigms of Byzantium, at least aesthetically. Does it therefore also part ways with Byzantine theological concepts and interpretations? To answer that question, first let's return to medieval domed Byzantine churches like those on which St. Nicholas is based. As I mentioned, in such churches, the vertical axis of the architecture was understood as a hierarchic scheme descending from heaven, represented by the dome, to the earthly realm below where the faithful gathered. Again, this hierarchy is expressed very clearly in the content of traditional iconographic programs, like that at St. Nicholas. But the surrounding materials may either support or oppose that symbolism. In Byzantine churches in which the walls were covered primarily with marble, an emphasis was still placed on the distinction, and thus the union, between the zones that represented heaven and earth. As a result, there too, the symbolism focused on the meeting of the earthly and the divine in the context of sacred space and liturgical worship. For example, a 10th century acrosis of the Studios Monastery in Constantinople, quoted here, contrasts the colorful, variegated, dynamic marbles in the lowest register of the interior, interpreted as we've seen elsewhere as images of the earthly creation, with the spiritual realm of the icons above expressed in golden mosaic. Even when marble was used to evoke the sea rather than forests or fields, it still may have contributed to a symbolic distinction between heaven and earth. Fabio Berri has suggested that ocean-like floors recalled the separation of the waters in Genesis 1. The marble floor became the waters on the earth, while the waters in heaven were represented again by an overarching, luminous golden dome. But in St. Nicholas, the use of white marble from top to bottom, from dome to floor, risks aesthetic uniformity rather than the contrast described by Byzantine commentators, especially as its marble elements blend into the pale, textured, sky-like backgrounds seen throughout the icons on the naos walls. Father Lucas, the Athonite monk who painted the iconography for St. Nicholas, has described the impression of this church as simply entering the heavenly dome. And really, that's quite beautiful. But if we're looking to Byzantine models, then it is worth considering how they, in their aesthetic choices, created a dynamic sense of descent and ascent between heaven and earth, emphasizing the encounter of human and divine, the very iconicity of the church as a site of both incarnation and theosis. Another point here is that in Byzantium, as McGuire has shown, materials that lacked intense color and were thus seen as pale, such as gold or in fact unblemished white marble, were used to express the spiritual rather than the earthly. So again, this is another way in which the subtler, pale Pentelic marble at St. Nicholas also might risk an overemphasis on the heavenly alone. Again, in terms of Byzantine theological concepts, we'd be looking for not just heaven, but heaven and earth meeting in a mystical and sacramental encounter. Let's turn now to the impact of St. Nicholas white marble interior on the quality of the light inside the church. Because if we're referencing how Byzantines understood sacred space, we can't pass by a key consideration for the materials. The materials used in any church interior must be considered in terms of how they affect the light. Light and the experience and symbolism of light were of paramount importance in Byzantine churches, with their candles and lamps, their reflective gold mosaics and polished colored marbles, and their strategically placed windows. Byzantines often described their churches in terms of radiant illumination, both spiritual and material, and designed them with lighting effects very much in mind. The articulation of light is also central to Calatrava's elegant modernist approach, with its characteristic sculptural white forms. Indeed, he has said that light is to architecture what sound is to music. Moreover, he has described the relationship of light to architecture in terms of spiritual transcendence. But the resulting phenomena are not quite the same for the Byzantines as for Calatrava. The light in Byzantine sacred spaces, including at Hagia Sophia and in the smaller, darker Middle Byzantine churches, was experienced as dynamic, evanescent, mysterious, yet revelatory. This effect was achieved through layered, luminous and reflective surfaces, the movement of the sun and flickering candlelight, and a rich diversity of colors, patterns, and textures. In contrast, the light at St. Nicholas, as emphasized and reflected by its white marble decor and in this age of the kind of artificial light we now have, risks becoming static, shadowless, and very straightforward. And as Cutler warned long ago about another modern Orthodox church with ample light and a predominantly white interior, where nothing is hidden, nothing is left to be revealed. Further, as Becerra Pancheva has vividly explained, the ambient phenomenon in Byzantine spaces linked material spectacle to ineffable kinetic divine presence, ultimately creating a vision of transfigured matter. In other words, it was in fact another expression of the meeting of heaven and earth that we've seen again and again as being at the heart of the theology of the Christian East. In contrast to this transformation of matter, Calatrava has expressed his goal as a dematerializing effect, which he links to the spiritual nature of architecture. It is the architect's approach to light, he has said, that perceptually changes the material into the immaterial. So here again, if we're looking to Byzantine models, we might consider the distinction between transfiguration and dematerialization, between the foregrounding of the material creation and its hope for salvation versus the illusion of its absence. This possible overemphasis on the immaterial and the heavenly has already begun to be beautifully, and I expect quite instinctively and naturally, redressed by the community of faith at St. Nicholas Church. I've been fortunate enough to visit the church several times, both as part of my research into the sacred arts of the Orthodox tradition, and also just as a layperson who's happily gotten to worship there. And on my last visit, I saw that some new elements had been brought into the church, some for the Paschal season, I think, and others perhaps lastingly. All of these additions create more visual variety and more reference to the earthly creation at the lowest register of the church. In fact, I found it striking that the new candle stands, icon stands, textiles, and other objects, all in one way or another feature plant or animal motifs. And even though it was midday, the lighting was somehow dimmer than I'd seen it before, certainly far dimmer than it had ever been in the renderings. Shadows were emerging, and the candles at the front of the church created a warm glimmer off the white marble walls. Just these few small changes to me have already begun to transform this church, evoking Byzantine theological concepts concerning liturgical spaces, while also retaining and respecting the intrinsic beauty of Calatrava's design. After all, church only becomes church when activated by ritual use, by the loving inhabitation of the worshiping faithful. So as important as materials are, they certainly don't have the last word. As this church continues to evolve as a living space over the coming generations, there will be ever more opportunities to visually manifest the heart and mind of the faith that is practiced and embodied there. And I look forward to seeing what comes next. Maybe richly grained wooden chairs with a glowing finish and deeply colored cushions. This is what I've done in my imagination, anyway, with all love and respect for this extraordinary space. We couldn't talk about white marble at St. Nicholas without closing with a discussion of its exterior. Indeed, the church's marble-clad, illuminated exterior is probably its most renowned feature. The effect was achieved by slicing white pentelic marble 1 to 3 millimeters thick, fusing it between glass panels, and mounting LEDs behind. As a result, the church looks like solid marble during the day, but glows from within at night. This unique approach to a church exterior joins Calatrava's interest in the effects of light with the theme of the light of Christ that was expressly requested by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese to be included in the church's design. And funnily enough, the exterior of St. Nicholas, with its technologically advanced and unprecedented use of materials, is, I would argue, simply and wholly consistent with Orthodox ecclesial tradition. Examples exist of early, middle, and late Byzantine churches with white marble exteriors. Indeed, archaeological evidence now indicates that at least some of the facades of Hagia Sophia itself were originally veneered with white marble. On such a scale, that marble must have been truly magnificent, not to mention highly visible from a distance by land or by sea. Later examples include the atrium of the 9th century Church of the Virgin of the Pharos in Constantinople, described as gleaming bright and cheerful, and the Church of the Virgin at Studenitsa, around 1300, with its glistening white marble facades. As far as interpretation goes, Elena Erdiolan has suggested that white marble on Byzantine church exteriors was used to symbolize the divine light, just as it does at St. Nicholas. At St. Nicholas, then, the artificial lighting, though novel, only enhances the meaning of the material and the church structure. Technology simply extends what's called the fair spectacle of white marble and its symbolism as divine light into the urban nightscape, into this place. During the day, the church indeed gleams bright and cheerful, the shine of the pinnacle of its dome topped by the golden cross, visible from blocks away over the trees. At night, its golden glow appears warm and welcoming, the light of Christ shining into the darkness, inviting all to approach.